Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. The living room at the Rockwell residence. The stage is ready, the overture is over, and the curtain has opened. Everything is not as it seems. For some reason, I expected something more eloquent from a woman who teaches creative writing at a local community college. The room was dark, very dark, and I could barely make out Sally sitting in my favorite reclining chair, her legs pulled up and she was wrapped in a blanket. When I got closer, I saw that her hair was disheveled, her makeup was ruined, and she stank of vomit. Let me tell you what it looks like, then you can correct any inaccuracies. My wife started to protest, but I barked. "Shut your mouth. I'll tell you when you can talk." I stood over her and started talking. I was going through customs with my team when two men in suits showed badges and told me to go with them. They introduced themselves as Chicago Police Department detectives and escorted me to one of the Immigration and Naturalization Service interrogation rooms. The older one followed me inside and closed the door. The room was empty except for a single chair. He said, "Have a seat." Then he asked, "Where were you at 12 o'clock this afternoon?" Through a crack in the curtains, I could see a junior agent interviewing my team. I looked at him like he was an idiot. "You understand that I am the captain of the plane and have just landed from Paris. It's in France, not in the suburbs of Joliet. Since I flew through half a dozen time zones today, I assume you mean Chicago time. In that case, I was piloting a Boeing 747-200 at an altitude of 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. We were flying at Mach 0.84. Here's my logbook, if you want to confirm it." I opened my briefcase and offered it to him. He wasn't looking, so I continued. "I had a crew of 14 people, as well as 416 passengers who can vouch for me. So, what exactly is all this about?" A younger agent came in and announced. They all agree that he was flying the plane. It was amazing how quickly their attitude changed when they realized how stupid they looked. "Well, Captain, I'm sorry to inconvenience you, but we're investigating a murder." "Murder? No one died on my plane," I protested. "No, sir, earlier today. Since I've been in Europe the last couple of days, I think I have a pretty good alibi." "Yes, sir." "Then who said I killed someone?" "Your wife did it." "What?" I shouted. My reaction was sincere, because my friend Angelo was just supposed to beat the crap out of a fool, break his nose and jaw too. But don't kill him. "What? My wife said that? Who did my wife say I killed?" "Wait a minute. This is a joke, right?" "This is not a joke. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but she said you killed her lover." I jumped up from my chair and shouted in his face. "A lover? You mean a lover?" He didn't back down an inch. "Yes, sir. It's not funny. My wife is faithful. She would never cheat on me." "You've got the wrong person. You must be confusing me with someone else." "I'm sorry, Captain, but your wife said she was sure you did it. She said you beat him to death in your driveway with a baseball bat." "How?" "I was on the plane. She knew that. She knows that I was in France." "Explain it to me." "I'm sorry, but she said she thought you changed your trip when you found out she was having an affair." "Stop talking like that," I shouted. "My wife is not having an affair. She would never betray our wedding vows." The detectives stared at me blankly. I think they've seen too many deaths to be compassionate. I fell back into my chair and started sobbing. "Anyway, it looks like your wife was played by a professional. The fool preyed on women whose husbands spent a lot of time traveling. It's probably no consolation, but we need to interview 3 more cuckold husbands." Hearing this spoken aloud in a cold, emotionless voice, my heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. I doubled over in agony. One of the detectives put his hand on my shoulder and asked, "Captain, is there anyone I can call for you?" "I want to talk to my stupid wife." I pounded the air with my fists. "I don't think it's too good an idea until you cool off." The older detective whispered something in his partner's ear and left the room. When he returned, he apologized and said they had to go. "Wait before you leave." "Who was he?" The older detective took a battered notebook out of his jacket pocket and flipped through it. "A man named Michael Wakeman, 30 years old. He was the same age as our son." "If I may ask one more question, did he die quickly, or did he suffer?" A sadistic smile crossed his face. The attacker lured him outside by setting fire to his brand-new convertible Corvette. Wakeman ran out of your side door in his underpants. The first swing of the baseball bat caught him across the chest. The medical examiner said he had several broken ribs. The next one broke his back. The attacker then turned him over and kicked him several times in the groin. Shortly before the car exploded, he delivered a fatal blow to his skull. Paramedics said he was still moaning and spewing blood from his ears and mouth when they got there. He lingered for a couple of minutes before his heart gave out. So yes, he didn't die peacefully at all. I tried not to make my smile too noticeable. Perhaps I should warn you that your wife might not be there when you get home. The house was damaged when Wakeman's car exploded. All the windows on that side were blown out, and some fire damage was caused. Part of me wanted to scream with joy, but instead I covered my face with my hands and started crying again. The reality hit me and I stayed in this room, unable to move, until someone from the INS knocked on the door and said they needed a room. Somehow I managed to find my car and drive home, or what's left of it. So now you tell me, what's wrong with what it looks like? A quiet suburb west of Chicago. In the late 1960s, a TV show called Bewitched was released. One of his quirky characters was Gladys Kravitz, a local resident who was often shown peeking out from behind the curtains at the Stevens house. In my neighborhood, the role of Gladys is played by Angelo D'Agostino, an elderly widower who lives right across the street from my house. Since Marie, his wife of 52 years, died last fall, Angelo has been spending his time keeping an eye on comings and goings. On fine days, he sits on his porch and greets passers-by. When the weather is bad, he sits in the house near the window and waves to everyone. Today was July 15th, and the weather was perfect. Angelo was on watch, dressed in an old shirt, black shorts, and knee-length black knee socks. Most people, especially my wife, avoided him like the plague because he's a damn repulsive type. Since I went on long business trips several times a month, I was grateful to Angelo for looking after my house. He always waited for me to come home and let me in on the local gossip. I usually gave him an inexpensive gift for my trip. The German chocolate and coffee were very well received. He stood up as I pulled into my driveway and waved me over. He seemed eager to share some gossip, so I left my bags in the trunk and crossed the street. Your friend has a really beautiful Corvette. A friend? What friend? The one who parked in your driveway yesterday. I would have thought Sally would have told you because she invited him in. He showed up at exactly 12 o'clock and stayed for exactly 3 hours. What did this friend look like? He's cute, a typical playboy in fashionable mirrored sunglasses. Well-dressed, khaki trousers, and a polo shirt. I tried to figure out who it could be. I guess one of the other pilots wanted to make me jealous. But who? And why would he stay so long? And why didn't Sally mention anything about it when we were talking? I guess that the mysterious driver wanted to surprise me with his fiberglass toy and asked her not to say anything. I was in our bedroom unpacking my bags when Sally came home from the store. She ran up the stairs and hugged me, almost knocking me down. How is my lover boy? To say that it was a much warmer greeting than I usually received would be an understatement. Soon we were overcome with passion, and all thoughts of mysterious cars were forgotten. We spent the rest of the week as newlyweds. Sally was the perfect wife and lover. And when we went out to dinner, she was wearing one of the outfits I bought, which she called unsuitable for a 48-year-old woman. She was even wearing nylon stockings and garters, which I discovered she wasn't wearing when she got out of the car. When I left for work the following Wednesday, my love interest was completely satisfied. She even put a romantic note in my suitcase. On that trip, I was the happiest guy in friendly skies. I couldn't wait to get home. Unfortunately, Angelo dropped a bomb on me again. That friend of yours came in on the Corvette again yesterday. I pressed him for more details. He's a younger guy. He laughed and said, well, everyone is younger than me. I think he would have been 30, maybe 35. He also seems to be in good shape. Very punctual. I arrived here at noon and stayed until 3. Who the hell was this mysterious visitor? I thought. Once again, Sally came home while I was unpacking. I went down the stairs and was rewarded with a bear hug and Sally's tongue in my throat. When I opened my arms to catch my breath, Sally announced that she was going to cook a culinary masterpiece for me according to a recipe she found in a magazine. She bought a couple of expensive steaks and was going to feed me like a real man. She needs to run to the grocery store to buy the last ingredient. But take it easy while I cook, she purred, handing me a beer. Red lights were flashing and alarms were wailing in my head. In 30 years of marriage, my wife has never brought me a beer or told me to relax when I get home from a trip. She always had a list of things to do that she had to hand over to me even before I took off my uniform. That little voice in my head said she felt guilty and was trying to make herself feel better. I decided to poke around a bit to see if I could find anything wrong. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I ran outside and started rummaging through the trash cans to see if I could find anything. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for. I returned to our room and began to rummage carefully through the drawers of her underwear. Sally never gave me the slightest reason to doubt her loyalty, so I felt guilty rummaging through her underwear. Nothing. I checked the bedside table. It's just the same thing that's been there for years. Then I opened the basket in Sally's bathroom. It was empty. Then I noticed that the bed linen was freshly laundered. It seemed strange to me, since it was changed the morning I left. But I would need a lot more than clean sheets to stand up to her. I spent a few minutes going through all her shoe boxes. Damn, this woman has a lot of shoes, also unsuccessfully. I looked at her closet, but I didn't notice anything new. Everything looked fine. I had to interrupt my investigation when I heard the door open. "Where is my jet driver?" she called. I decided to wait until morning to see if Sally had mentioned her mysterious visitor. After all, I knew there had to be a simple explanation. I was glad I waited, because that night she was a shrew in bed. At breakfast, I tried to make some unexpected remarks to her, not too conspicuous, but she was never embarrassed. I had a very bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. After lunch, Sally said she needed to run to the store to buy something for dinner. I declined her invitation to join her because I needed to be home alone for a while. As soon as she left, I resumed my search for clues, starting with the laundry room. There were 2 baskets, one filled with Sally's clothes and the other with our bedding. It was 2 weeks in a row when all potential evidence was laundered. I had to figure out a way to turn off the washing machine so that it wouldn't happen a third time. I decided to become active. Ever since the airline started flying to Paris, Sally has been trying to get me to take her there. Since it was a new destination, I didn't have a flight to Paris, but I was able to exchange it with another pilot. When I told Angelo that I was flying to Paris next week, his eyes lit up and he told me stories about the liberation of the City of Lights. I found out that his only weakness was Chateau de Montifau cognac, which he developed an addiction to when he served in France during World War II. Unfortunately, the pensioner's social security checks allowed him to buy only the domestic variety from the local big box liquor store. That evening, during dinner, I gave my surprise. I told Patty that I had changed my next flight from Frankfurt to Paris and invited her to fly with me. I promised her a day of shopping on the Champs-Élysées, followed by dinner at the Jules Verne restaurant at the top of the Eiffel Tower, followed by a romantic moonlight cruise on the River Seine. Sally flatly refused me. When I asked her why she didn't want to fly, she grunted and muttered something vague about being too busy to leave. I begged her to change her schedule and asked, what could be so important that it can't wait? And again she challenged me and said, maybe we could do it another time? Things weren't going well in our marriage. For the rest of the week, I was more of a zombie than a human being. I couldn't look at Sally without bile rising in my mouth. I rejected her advances last night. She kept asking what happened. I still haven't answered. On the morning of my trip, I made another attempt to persuade Sally to spend a romantic 36 hours in Paris. I put my hands on her shoulders, looked straight into her eyes and prayed, please choose me. And again she said, no. I almost told her about my suspicions, but I knew I couldn't prove them, so I held my tongue. The last thing I did before I left was cut the cold water hose for the washing machine. Not very hard, but enough to discourage Sally from doing laundry. He started spraying water all over the wall. The floor in the laundry room was tilted towards the drain, and when the water rose a couple of inches, water flowed down it. I closed the door and was pleased to see that it did not leak under the wall. Sally would have to go to the laundry to find the flood. On the way to the airport, I was lost in my thoughts and a little worried about whether I would be able to concentrate enough to fly the plane. Hundreds of people put their lives in my hands, and I did my best to suppress everything except doing my job. My co-pilot realized that something was wrong after we got up and offered to take over the controls. I said that I must have been ill with something and took an early break. The team has a rest area at the back of the plane, and I spent the next hour tearing my soul apart. When we landed, I apologized for being sick and said I would spend my entire vacation in bed. Angelo said that the visitor arrived at 12 o'clock sharp. I took a calculated risk. He had a reason to stick to this schedule, and called home at exactly 12:02, hoping against hope that Sally would respond or at least listen to my message as it was recorded. It was picked up by the answering machine after the second ring. "You have reached the Rockwell residence. Please leave a message and we will get back to you as soon as possible." I started, "Sally, my love, I'm in the most romantic city in the world, but without you, I might as well be in." I never got to finish the sentence because the recorder turned me off. I dialed 0 for the outside line, then the country code, followed by my city code and home phone number. The phone kept ringing, which meant that someone had turned off the answering machine. I could only hope that when they heard my voice, they would end their date. True to my word, I never left the room during my entire stop. By the time I was sitting in the cockpit, I had come to terms with the demise of my marriage. For a change, Sally was at home when I returned from my trip, except that she looked like a drowned rat. Without even saying hello, she began to tell me loudly how the basement was flooded and everything below was destroyed. She was very upset when I told her that I would look at the basement after I changed my uniform. I must admit, I was curious why the water didn't go down the drain. I put on cut-off jeans and a t-shirt, then went to the garage to get my boots. The first thing I noticed was the laundry basket on the table. I could see our sheets along with a pair of Sally's panties on top. I slipped them into my pocket. Water was gushing from a copper plumbing fitting, so I asked Sally why she disconnected the hose instead of turning off the faucet. Her answer was not very clear. I found a drain and pulled out some rags that clogged it. Soon a whirlpool formed in the water. I sighed as I watched the water level drop. I told Sally to go upstairs and make coffee. I used this time to examine the gusset on the panties that I took out. She was covered in gore. I damn near blew a hole in the wall, but I kept my cool long enough to inspect the sheets. There was a big spot right in the middle. I moved the basket to a place where it was not easy to see and began to replay the inevitable confrontation in my mind while I sorted through the wet things. I took out a large plastic garbage bag and started stuffing things into it. 10 minutes later, I was hauling bags of junk to the curb when Angelo called me over. "Let's go inside. We need to talk." It was the first time I was invited to his house. He invited me to sit down. "Captain." Angelo always called me Captain. "I've known you since the day you were born. Your parents were closer to me than most of my family members." He clasped his hands tightly. "I do not know any easy way to tell you this, but your wife was unfaithful. When a man arrived in a red Corvette yesterday, I crossed the street and looked through your living room window. I'm sorry to tell you this, but they kissed while undressing each other. I watched until they ran upstairs. My worst fears have been confirmed. It deeply hurts me to see how disrespectful she was to you. My friend, I will try to put this as delicately as possible. A betrayal like this cannot go unpunished. I have, let's say, connections with a group of people who operate outside the law. Some of these people have been in debt to me since we did business together many years ago. My friend, all you have to do is say the word, and that son of a bitch will never bother your wife again. I swear by the eyes of my grandchildren that no one will lay a finger on her, but she will learn her lesson." I remembered muttering something like, "Thank you, but I'm afraid it's too late." Angelo took my hands in his and said, "But it's not too late to keep her from hurting you again." I turned around and nodded my head. "Do it." We spent a few minutes discussing my schedule so that I wouldn't be around when justice was served. I was in a daze when I returned to my house. Later that evening, I remembered that the bottle of cognac I had bought was still in my car. I was still pretty excited about our previous conversation and kept wondering if he was serious. I left the box on Angelo's porch, rang his doorbell, and then hurried back to my house so I wouldn't have to talk to him anymore. It was dark outside when I turned the last corner in front of my house. Traffic was stopped by a police car blocking the road. The officer came up and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but only locals are allowed inside." I took out my wallet and handed the officer my driver's license. He looked at the address, then at the name. His face was replaced by an awkward, embarrassed expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rockwell." I could see people standing on the lawns in front of their houses and pointing at me as I drove past, some waving at me. There were a couple of big trucks from TV stations parked on the street, and there were the remains of a burnt-out Corvette in my driveway, so I had to park a couple doors away from them. As I got closer, one of the reporters noticed my uniform, and soon I was the center of attention with a dozen questions shouted at the same time. The loudest one continued to shout, "Did you kill him?" I raised my hand and started to speak. The flashes momentarily blinded me. Earlier today, the Chicago Police Department informed me that my wife was having an affair and her lover was killed in my driveway. It happened when I was flying a plane over the Atlantic Ocean. So no, I didn't kill him. But I would like to thank the one who has rid the society of this piece of human garbage. I rehearsed this line all the way home and hoped that I would have a chance to use it. The policeman shouted, "Let him through." I thanked him and walked around the yard, stopping for a minute to inspect the damage. I thought it was a good opportunity to take a picture. All the windows were blown out, and my garage was a burnt-out shell. Fortunately, the sturdy brick walls prevented the fire from spreading inside the house. I opened the door and stepped inside. "So now you tell me, what's wrong with what it looks like?" Sally wiped her face with her sleeve. She looked bad. "It shouldn't have been like this. It's impossible," I shouted. "It was supposed to be you and me against the whole world." I fell to my knees, sobbing. "You destroyed us. You've ruined our family, our life together. You've ruined everything." Sally didn't answer, but I could hear her struggling for air. Her breathing was like that of an asthmatic who needed an inhaler. "Why? Why? Why?" I covered my face with my hands and tried to catch my breath. Sally started spewing apologies, swearing that she loved me. "I do not know why. You're the only man I've ever loved. I'm so sorry that I hurt you. I wanted to hurt my wife as much as she hurt me. You knew that your friend was married and his wife was 9 months pregnant. Their child will grow up without a father because of you." "Oh my God, no. Stop it," she screamed. "You knew you weren't the only fool he made love to. Detectives said they had several other husbands who were suspects. You were just another fool to him." She made a mournful sound, such as I have never heard from a human. "I swear, I was going to break up with him. It would have been over today. I felt so guilty for not going to Paris." I told her to shut her lying mouth. "Did you feel guilty because you didn't go to Paris? You should have felt guilty for being a fool. And when exactly were you going to break up? After you used it? I know the police found him in his underwear, so don't lie to me." Sally began to moan. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." "You are welcome." The funniest thought came to my mind. If you really felt guilty for canceling your trip to Paris, you would have broken up with him before you let that fool into our house. If you had done that, he would have been killed in someone else's house, and you would have gone unpunished because I would never have suspected anything. I would have continued to act like a blissful idiot, thinking that my wife was faithful to me. Well, cheater, how many other men have you used during our marriage and gotten away with it? I swear to God, that he's the only one in the world. Why should I believe you?" Sally clutched her stomach and doubled over as if she was going to be sick. "I never thought I'd say this, but my mother was right about you. She hated you from the first moment she met you. Do you remember that day? It's been 3 months since our graduation, and you came to tell me that you missed your period. Mom said you did it on purpose to trap me. But even though she had nothing but contempt for you, she opened her house to you. I can't tell you how many times she slipped me a few dollars because she knew I didn't have a penny in my account. She always made me promise not to tell you that she paid for baby food. And when I became a night flight pilot who looked after our son so that you could go to college, I've always wanted to prove my mom wrong. I was sick of her treating you like an outcast, fawning over my brother's wives. But I always stood up for you because we were a team. We were one. When you became a professor, I was beaming with pride at what you had achieved. It was the first time I saw how proud she was of what you were doing. Now I thank God that she didn't live to see you destroy us." Sally screamed. "Oh my God, why?" "You know, my father died when I was barely 12. One evening, when I was about 15, I asked my mother why she still wears her wedding rings. Before she could answer, I said what only a stupid teenager would do. 'Mom, you don't look that old. You should go out on a date.' She smiled, wrapped her arms around my arms and said, 'I can't do that because I'm married. We swore before God and all our friends and family to leave everyone else. But Dad is dead. Nothing has changed. Your father lives in my heart as much as he did when he lived in our house. And someday we'll be together again." I told her I didn't understand. She just smiled and said she would pray that one day I would do it. It took me a long time to grow up enough to begin to understand the depth of their love and how their devotion went beyond the grave. I never told you this, but on my first flight, the flight attendant invited me to have a drink with her during our stop. She was stunningly gorgeous, and I succumbed to the temptation, but only for a moment. I thought about my mom, showed her my wedding ring, and said, "I can't do that because I'm married." I can't begin to tell you how many times I've turned down offers like this. The rumor spread pretty quickly that I was a fool. I wore this insult as a badge of honor. I let out a long sigh. I have never seen a more perfect love than my parents had. I used to think we were getting there. And now you've destroyed us. All I have left for you is hate. Sally managed to stop crying long enough to say, "Please, I'll do anything to make it up to you." "Anything? Okay, just go back in time. Back to the moment when that fool started his seduction. I want you to change history. I want you to tell him to fuck off because you're happily married. I want you to tell him that your husband has the most glamorous job in the world and treats you like a queen. I want you to tell him to go home to his pregnant wife. I want you to tell him that if he ever talks to you again, your husband will kick his ass. Can you do that?" Sally fell to her knees, sobbing. She shook her head. "I don't think you can do that. Please forgive me, please. I'm leaving. I do not know where I am going, but I have to leave you." Sally rushed at me and grabbed my ankle. "No, please, please," she begged. "Let me go, or I'll break your fucking arm." She loosened her grip, and I turned and headed for the door. When the door opened, she screamed, "I wish he'd killed me too."